A man sits alone in a stone tower in the French countryside, writing about himself. Not his achievements, not his conquests, not his service to kings. Himself, his thoughts, his doubts, his digestion, his kidney stones, his fear of death, his love of wine. The year is 1571, and Michel de Montaigne has just done something almost no one in history had dared to do. He's made himself the subject. What he doesn't know yet is that this strange experiment, this act of radical introspection, will change how human beings understand themselves for the next 5 centuries. We're going to follow Montaigne from a castle in Bordeaux, where he was born with a silver spoon he never quite trusted, through a career in law and politics he never wanted, into a library tower where he would invent a new form of literature, and finally to a death that came far too soon, but somehow exactly on time. This is the story of the man who taught us how to think about thinking. February 28th, 1533. The Château de Montaigne sits in the rolling hills of the Périgord region, surrounded by vineyards that stretch toward the horizon. Inside, a woman named Antoinette de Luppe de Villeneuve is giving birth to her first surviving child. The baby is a boy. They name him Michel Eyquem. The de Montaigne comes later from the estate itself, but we'll get to that. His father, Pierre Eyquem, is newly wealthy. Not aristocratic wealth passed down through generations of bloodlines, but merchant wealth, earned wealth. Pierre's grandfather had made a fortune in the herring trade, of all things. Fish money. By the time Michel is born, the family has bought land, built a proper chateau, and is busily trying to transform itself from bourgeois upstarts into respectable nobility. This tension between old money and new, between inherited status and earned position, will haunt Michel his entire life. Pierre Eyquem is an unusual father for his time, or perhaps for any time. He's obsessed with education but distrusts traditional methods. He's read the humanist philosophers, absorbed their ideas about childhood development, and decided that his son will be raised according to principles that most of his neighbours would consider insane. The first principle: the child must wake gently. No sudden noises, no harsh transitions from sleep to waking. Pierre hires a musician whose sole job is to play soft music outside Michel's room each morning, easing the boy into consciousness. Imagine being so wealthy, so committed to a pedagogical theory that you employ a full-time wake-up musician for your toddler. The second principle, and this one is even stranger: Michel must learn Latin before French, not alongside French, before. Pierre wants his son to speak Latin as naturally as breathing, and he's convinced the only way to achieve this is to make Latin the language of infancy. He hires a German tutor named Horstinus, who speaks no French, and he forbids everyone in the household, servants included, from speaking anything but Latin in the child's presence. The maids gossip in Latin. The stable boys curse in Latin. A 3-year-old Michel asks for his dinner in the language of Cicero. Does this work? Partially. Michel does become fluent in Latin, but the price is isolation. He grows up in a linguistic bubble, cut off from the ordinary life of French childhood. Years later, he'll write about feeling like a stranger in his own country, disconnected from the common people whose language he learned late and never quite mastered with the same ease as Latin. But Pierre isn't finished with his experiments. When Michel is 6, he's sent to the Collège de Guyenne in Bordeaux, one of the finest schools in France. Here the gentle awakening stops. Medieval education is brutal by design. Students rise before dawn, attend lectures for hours without break, memorize vast quantities of text through repetition and fear. The rod is used freely. Discipline is maintained through humiliation. Michel survives, more than survives actually. He's a good student, though not a brilliant one. He studies rhetoric, dialectic, philosophy, the classic curriculum of Renaissance humanism. But something shifts in him here. The boy raised on gentle music and experimental pedagogy encounters the harsh machinery of institutional learning. and he begins to develop the skepticism that will define his life's work. If his father's methods were unusual and the school's methods are traditional, which ones actually teach anything? Do any of them? What does it even mean to learn? At 13, he completes his studies at Guyenne. Now comes the question every well-born young man must face. What next? The options are limited. The church, the military, the law, or management of the family estate. Michel is the oldest surviving son. The estate will eventually be his, but Pierre has other plans first. He wants his son to have a profession, a career, something beyond simply inheriting land. Law it is. We don't know exactly where Michel studied law. The records are incomplete, most likely Toulouse, possibly Paris. What we do know is that by his early 20s he's qualified as a lawyer and has secured a position as a councillor in the Parlement of Bordeaux. This is not a legislative body, despite the name. It's a court, one of the regional judicial institutions that interpret and apply royal law. It's prestigious work, respectable, exactly what a young man from a family trying to establish itself should be doing. Michel hates it. Not immediately, perhaps. Not with the burning intensity that will come later. But there's a mismatch between his temperament and the work. Legal practice in 16th century France is a theatre of ambition, status-seeking, and political manoeuvring. Cases drag on for years. Arguments become personal. Everyone is trying to climb, to be noticed, to advance. Michel finds the whole enterprise exhausting and slightly absurd, but in 1554, something happens that makes the tedium bearable. Another young man joins the Parlement, a councillor named Etienne de la Boétie. He's 3 years older than Michel, already known as a gifted writer and thinker. They meet in the course of official business, two lawyers in a room full of lawyers. What happens next is one of the great friendships in literary history. How do you describe the connection between two people that defies ordinary explanation? Michel will spend years trying. He'll write that they were looking for each other before they met, that when they finally spoke, they found themselves already intimate, already known to each other. If you press me to say why I loved him, he'll write decades later, I can say no more than because he was he, and I was I. La Boétie is everything Michel wants to be, confident where Michel doubts, eloquent where Michel hesitates, passionate about ideas where Michel is beginning to suspect that passion itself might be a kind of error. They talk about everything: philosophy, poetry, politics, the nature of friendship, the purpose of life. They read together, write letters when separated, plan a future where they'll retire to their estates and devote themselves to study and conversation. For 4 years, this friendship transforms Michel's life. The tedious work of the Parlement becomes tolerable because La Boétie is there. The social climbing and political games seem less suffocating because he has someone who sees through them too. They're writing together, thinking together, building something neither could build alone. And then La Boétie gets sick. The summer of 1563 is hot and disease is spreading through Bordeaux. La Boétie develops what they call a colic, probably dysentery, possibly something worse. Within days, he's bedridden. Within a week, it's clear he's dying. Michel sits with him through the final days, watching his friend, this person who had become essential to his existence, slip away. The death is agonizing, drawn out. La Boétie remains conscious almost to the end, talking to Michel, trying to comfort him, making plans for his manuscripts, his possessions, his legacy. When he dies on August 18th, 1563, something in Michel dies too. Not the obvious part, not the part that keeps breathing and working and going through the motions of life. Something deeper, the possibility of that kind of connection. The belief that another person can complete you, can make the world make sense. Michel is 30 years old. He will live another 29 years, but he will never have another friendship like the one he just lost. He'll never look for one. How do you replace the irreplaceable? You don't. You learn to live with the hole where something essential used to be. He keeps working at the Parlement. What else is he going to do? The cases continue. The political manoeuvring continues. The whole exhausting machinery of Renaissance legal practice grinds on. But Michel is increasingly going through the motions. His heart isn't in it. His attention wanders. He starts thinking about the question he'll spend the rest of his life exploring. How should a person live? In 1565, 2 years after La Boétie's death, Michel does what his family has been pressuring him to do for years. He marries. Her name is Françoise de la Chassaigne. She's the daughter of a colleague at the Parlement, from a good family, appropriate in every way. The marriage is arranged, as marriages of their class always are. There's no pretense of romance. That's not what marriage is for. Marriage is for alliance, for children, for the management of property, and the continuation of family lines. What was the marriage actually like? We don't really know. Michel will write hundreds of thousands of words about himself, about his thoughts and feelings and bodily functions, but he barely mentions his wife. When he does, it's usually in the context of some general observation about marriage as an institution. This silence is itself revealing. She's there, managing the household, bearing children, playing her role. He's there, playing his. They coexist. That seems to be the extent of it. The children start coming, one after another, as they did in every family trying to secure its future. But this is the 16th century, and infant mortality is not a statistic. It's a lived reality in every household. Michel and Françoise have 6 daughters. 5 die in infancy or early childhood. Only one, Léonore, survives to adulthood. Imagine the accumulation of grief. Imagine preparing a nursery, hiring a wet nurse, naming a child, watching that child sicken and die, and then doing it again and again. Michael will write about grief, about the death of children, but always at a distance, always as a philosophical problem rather than a personal one. He'll say that nature has given us the mercy of not loving our children fully until they've survived the dangerous early years. He'll quote ancient philosophers on the need for emotional detachment. He'll construct elaborate arguments about why excessive grief is a kind of weakness. This is a man building walls around a wound he cannot bear to examine directly. So Michel retreats, not dramatically. He doesn't storm out of the Parlement throwing his robes behind him like some Renaissance Jerry Maguire. He just gradually disengages, shows up less frequently, takes longer vacations at the family estate, lets others handle the cases he would have fought over years before. By 1570, he's 37 years old and he makes it official. He resigns from the Parlement. His colleagues are probably relieved. The man who once argued cases with passion now radiates boredom. Better to have him gone than physically present, but mentally checked out. What does an unemployed nobleman do in 1570s France? If you're rich enough, if you have land and income from tenants, you can do the thing that would have been unthinkable to your ancestors, but is becoming fashionable among the educated elite. You can retire, not at 65 after a long career, at 37, in your prime. The Montaigne estate sits in the Périgord region of southwestern France. Rolling hills, vineyards, forests, the kind of landscape that looks timeless in paintings, but required constant management to remain productive. There's a chateau, of course. That's where the family lives, where Françoise manages the household, where Léonore grows up. But Michel doesn't retire to the chateau. He retires to the tower. There's a round tower attached to the chateau, the kind of architectural flourish that noble families added to look more castle-like and therefore more impressive. Most towers like this are used for storage or left empty. Michel turns his into something else entirely, a refuge, a laboratory, a place to think. He has the top floor converted into a study. Books line the walls, hundreds of them, quite possibly the best private library in the region. Classical authors, contemporary works, history, poetry, philosophy, everything he's been accumulating for years. He has quotes from his favourite texts inscribed on the wooden beams of the ceiling, sentences from Seneca, from Horace, from from the Bible, so he can lie on his back and read wisdom above him. He has a desk, a chair, a fireplace. That's it. No luxury, no decoration beyond the books and the inscriptions. This is a workspace, not a salon. From the windows he can see for miles, fields, forests, the road to Bordeaux. But mostly he doesn't look out, he looks in. On one of the beams he has an inscription carved in Latin. It's dated February 28th, 1571, his 38th birthday. The inscription announces that Michel de Montaigne, bored with the servitude of court and public employment, has retired to the bosom of the learned muses. He plans to spend his remaining years in calm and security. It's a declaration of independence, a middle finger to the career track, an announcement that he's done with other people's expectations and ready to figure out his own. What does he plan to do in this tower? Write, presumably. That's what educated men who retire to their libraries are supposed to do. Some great work of scholarship. A history of France, maybe. Or a treatise on law. Or translations of the classics. Something respectable. Something that fits the image of the learned gentleman. That's not what happens. Instead, Michel sits down in his tower and starts writing about himself. Not autobiography, in the usual sense. Not, I was born, I did this, then I did that. Something stranger. He starts examining his own mind, like it's a specimen. Recording his thoughts, his reactions, his opinions on everything and nothing. He calls these pieces essays. Essays. Attempts. The word itself is telling. Not treatises, not demonstrations, not arguments. Attempts. Provisional tries at understanding. He's not claiming to have figured anything out. He's just trying. The first essays are short. A few pages on friendship, on sadness, on fear. They're conventional enough. Lots of quotes from classical authors. The structure you'd expect from someone educated in rhetoric. But something's happening beneath the surface. Michel is starting to trust his own voice. He writes an essay called That to Philosophize is to Learn How to Die. Very classical theme. All the ancient philosophers wrote about death. Michel starts with the expected quotes from Cicero and Seneca. Death is natural. We shouldn't fear it. Wisdom consists in preparation for the inevitable. But then something shifts. Michel starts talking about his own fear of death. Not the fear itself exactly, but his observation of that fear. How it changes depending on his mood. How sometimes death seems acceptable and sometimes terrifying. How he's noticed that people who claim to be unafraid of death are usually lying or haven't really thought about it. This is new. This isn't how you're supposed to write philosophy. You're supposed to present arguments, marshal evidence, reach conclusions. You're not supposed to just describe your own mental weather and admit you haven't figured anything out. But Michel keeps doing it. Essay after essay. Some are still conventional, still heavy with classical quotations, but others are increasingly personal, increasingly weird. He writes about his digestion, about his kidney stones, about his preferences in food and drink, about his memory, which he claims is terrible, about his handwriting, which is messy, about the size and function of his thumb. Who writes philosophy about their thumb? Michel de Montaigne writes philosophy about his thumb. He's not being random. There's method in this weirdness. He's testing an idea. What if the way to understand human nature isn't to read more Aristotle? What if it's to look carefully at one human, yourself, and describe what you find there? Not the idealized version, not the self you wish you were, the actual self, complete with contradictions, inconsistencies, bodily functions, embarrassing preferences, and thoughts you're not supposed to admit to having. It's 1572 now. Michel is 39 years old, sitting in his tower, writing about himself, and outside the tower, France is tearing itself apart. The wars of religion have been grinding on for a decade. Catholics versus Huguenots, atrocity traded for atrocity, and nobody's winning except death, who's having a banner decade. On August 24th, 1572, the violence reaches a new level. It's the feast day of St. Bartholomew. And in Paris, the Catholic majority decides to solve the Huguenot problem permanently. What starts as targeted assassinations of Protestant leaders explodes into general massacre. Thousands die in Paris. Tens of thousands die as the violence spreads to other cities. News of the massacre reaches Bordeaux, reaches the Périgord, reaches Michel in his tower. How does he react? We don't have a diary entry. We don't have letters where he processes the horror. What we have are essays written afterward, where he thinks about violence, about religious certainty, about the human capacity for cruelty. And what's striking is his refusal to take sides, not because he doesn't care, because he sees the same pattern on both sides. Catholics massacring Huguenots in the name of religious truth. Huguenots retaliating against Catholics in the name of religious truth. Everyone certain. Everyone convinced God is on their side. Everyone willing to kill for their certainty. Michel looks at this and thinks, maybe certainty is the problem. Maybe the people who are most dangerous are the people who are most sure they're right. Maybe doubt is not weakness, but wisdom. Maybe I don't know is the beginning of actual thinking rather than the end of it. This is heresy. Not the theological kind, though it's probably that too. Intellectual heresy. In a world where everyone is supposed to have strong opinions about everything, where taking a side is a moral obligation, where fence-sitting is cowardice, Michel is suggesting that maybe the fence is the only honest place to sit. He starts writing an essay called Apology for Raymond Sebond. Sebond was a 15th century theologian who tried to prove Christian doctrine through reason alone. The book was controversial. Michel's father had asked him to translate it from Latin into French, which he did. Now Michel is writing a defense of Sebond. Or is he? The essay balloons. It becomes the longest thing he's ever written, eventually running to over 200 pages. It starts as a defense of Sebond's rationalism, but turns into something else. An exploration of the limits of human reason. An examination of how little we actually know. A catalogue of all the ways human beings deceive themselves into thinking they understand things they don't. Michel brings in everything. Stories from ancient historians, reports from travellers to the New World, observations of animal behaviour, mathematical paradoxes, optical illusions. He piles up example after example of human ignorance, human error, human inability to be certain about anything. The question underneath all of it, if we can't be certain about anything, what right do we have to kill each other over our certainties? If reason is as flawed as Michel is demonstrating it to be, what justifies burning heretics or massacring Protestants or launching crusades? He's not arguing for relativism, exactly. He's not saying all beliefs are equally valid. He's saying something more subtle, that recognizing our own fallibility should make us humble. That doubt is not the enemy of faith, but its necessary companion. That the worst cruelties come not from wickedness, but from righteousness. This is dangerous thinking in 1572. The Catholic Church doesn't like people questioning its certainties. The Protestant reformers don't like it either. They've got their own certainties, just different ones. Both sides think they have truth on their side, and here's Michel suggesting that maybe nobody has truth. Maybe we're all just guessing. Maybe the best we can do is be honest about our guessing. He keeps writing, not every day. He's not one of those writers who maintains a strict schedule. Sometimes he works for hours. Sometimes he doesn't touch his desk for weeks. He manages the estate when he has to, deals with family obligations, maintains his role as a local notable. But the tower is always there. The books are always there. The project of examining himself is always there. By 1574, he's been at this for 3 years. He's accumulated dozens of essays. Some are a few pages, some are 20 pages or more. They don't fit together into any obvious system. They contradict each other sometimes. In one essay, he'll praise something. In another, he'll criticize the same thing. He doesn't care. Consistency is for people who are pretending to be smarter than they are. He's trying to be honest about how confusing it is to be human. He starts thinking about publication. Should he? These essays are personal, weird, undignified. They talk about things respectable philosophers don't talk about. They admit to weaknesses and doubts. They're full of digressions and contradictions. Publishing them would mean exposing himself to judgment, to mockery, to the opinions of people who think philosophy should be systematic and serious. On the other hand, he's 41 years old. La Boétie has been dead for 11 years. His children keep dying. France is drowning in blood. Life is short and getting shorter. If not now, when? If he's going to put this strange project into the world, he needs to do it while he's still alive to see what happens. He starts preparing the manuscript, organising the essays, grouping them into books, not chronologically, not by theme exactly, more by feel, by instinct. He's not trying to build an argument, he's trying to create a portrait. Of himself, yes, but through himself of human beings in general. All the inconsistency, all the confusion, all the contradiction, that's not a bug, that's the point. In 1580, the first edition of the essays is published in Bordeaux, 2 volumes, 94 essays total. On the title page, Essays by Michel, Lord of Montaigne, and underneath in Latin, Viresque acquirit eundo. He gathers strength as he goes. A quote from Virgil about rumour spreading, or about a writer finding his voice. Take your pick. The book does not explode into the world, it seeps. A few dozen copies at first, circulating among the educated classes of southwestern France. Some readers are intrigued, some are baffled, most don't know what to make of it. This isn't how philosophy is supposed to work. Where's the system? Where's the argument that builds from first principles to grand conclusions? Where's the certainty? Montaigne offers none of these things. He offers himself, his wandering thoughts, his doubts, his kidney stones, his sexual failures, his opinions about radishes and thumb wrestling, and how to educate children. It's unprecedented. Within a year, though, something starts to happen. The book finds its readers. Not the systematic philosophers, not the university professors who want everything neat and categorized. Different readers, people who recognize themselves in Montaigne's confusion, people who've been pretending to have all the answers and are exhausted by the pretense, people who find relief in his honesty. Letters start arriving at the tower, from other nobles, from scholars, from readers Montaigne has never met. They thank him. They tell him they thought they were the only ones who felt this uncertain about everything. They ask questions, they argue with him, they want more. He's surprised by this. He'd half expected to be laughed at or ignored. Instead, he started a conversation. A strange, rambling, deeply personal conversation that's spreading across France and beyond. The book is being discussed in Paris. Copies are reaching Geneva, Lyon, even crossing into Italy. But France itself is getting worse. The religious wars that had simmered and occasionally boiled over now explode into something unprecedented. In August 1572, just as Montaigne was beginning his withdrawal, Catholic forces had massacred thousands of Protestants in Paris during what became known as the Saint Bartholomew's Day massacre. The violence spread to other cities. Decades of killing followed. Neighbour turned on neighbour. Cities besieged cities. No one was safe. Montaigne watched from his tower, but he couldn't stay there forever. He had responsibilities. He was still a nobleman, still a magistrate, still someone people expected to take sides. And he couldn't. Not the way they wanted him to. He saw atrocities on both sides. Catholic armies burning Protestant villages, Protestant forces sacking Catholic churches, everyone claiming God's blessing, everyone certain of their righteousness, everyone willing to torture and kill for their version of truth. In his essays, he wrote about cruelty, not in abstract philosophical terms, but as something he'd witnessed. He described executions he'd seen, tortures he'd heard about, and he made a radical argument. Certainty enables cruelty. The more convinced you are that you're right, the more terrible things you'll do to people who disagree. Doubt, by contrast, creates space for mercy. This wasn't popular thinking. Both Catholics and Protestants wanted warriors, not philosophers asking uncomfortable questions. But Montaigne kept asking them. In essay after essay, he examined the foundations of belief, the nature of truth, the limits of human knowledge, and he kept arriving at the same conclusion. We don't know as much as we think we do. Take religion itself. Montaigne was Catholic, more or less. He attended Mass, participated in the rituals, never publicly questioned church doctrine. But in his essays, he examined the variety of human beliefs with unsettling neutrality. Christians think this, Muslims think that. Ancient Romans thought something else entirely. Each group absolutely certain they're right. Each group willing to kill for their certainty. Who's correct? Montaigne won't say. Maybe that's not even the right question. Maybe the right question is, given that humans have believed contradictory things throughout history, each group equally convinced, what should that tell us about the reliability of human conviction? He's not attacking Christianity directly. He's too careful for that. But he's undermining something deeper, the confidence that allows people to burn each other alive over theological disputes. If you really understood how limited human knowledge is, how uncertain even our most cherished beliefs must be, could you still torture someone for disagreeing with you? The essays accumulate. He adds new ones, expands old ones. The project becomes addictive. Every experience becomes material. He watches peasants working in the fields and writes about the dignity of manual labour. He suffers through another bout of kidney stones and writes about pain. He reads ancient philosophers and argues with them. He remembers La Boétie and writes about friendship again, from new angles with new insights born from years of grief. His style evolves. The early essays are shorter, more conventional, closer to the philosophical tradition he's trying to break free from. The later ones sprawl, they digress. They follow his mind wherever it wants to go, even if that means starting an essay about war and ending up talking about whether animals have reason. Critics complain about the digressions. Montaigne doesn't care. The digressions are the point. Real thinking doesn't move in straight lines. Real thinking wanders, backtracks, gets distracted, circles around. Anyone who claims otherwise is lying about how their mind actually works. By the mid-1580s, Montaigne is famous. Not universally loved, but impossible to ignore. His essays are being read across Europe, translated into other languages. He's become something new. Not a systematic philosopher, not a theologian, not quite a literary figure. Something in between. Someone who uses writing to think out loud, who makes his uncertainty into a kind of wisdom. And then, despite everything, despite his withdrawal from public life, despite his determination to stay in his tower and just write, he gets pulled back into the world. In 1581, he's elected mayor of Bordeaux. He doesn't want the job. He says so explicitly. He writes to the king asking to be excused. He argues that he's not suited for public office, that his temperament is all wrong, that he's most useful in his library. The king insists. Bordeaux insists. His duty as a nobleman requires it, so he accepts. The irony isn't lost on him. Here he is, the great advocate of withdrawal, the philosopher of private life, now running a major city in the middle of a civil war. He serves 2 terms, 4 years total, and he's good at it despite himself, better than he expected. He mediates between factions, negotiates with both Catholic and Protestant leaders, tries to keep Bordeaux from becoming another massacre site. His approach to politics mirrors his approach to philosophy. Pragmatic, flexible, suspicious of ideology. He doesn't care which side wins. He cares about preventing unnecessary killing. He cares about making room for people to live together despite their differences. This makes him valuable as a mediator, but also makes neither side fully trust him. In 1585, plague strikes Bordeaux. The city council flees. Montaigne flees too. He later defends this decision in his essays, but not everyone agrees with his defence. A mayor who abandons his city during crisis? It doesn't look good. His political career ends. He returns to his tower, and he never leaves it for public office again. But he keeps writing. If anything, the experience of being mayor gives him new material. He writes about political leadership, about the difference between public and private duties, about the compromises necessary in a world where people believe irreconcilable things. He expands his earlier essays, sometimes doubling or tripling their length. He adds new layers of thought, new examples, new contradictions. The second edition appears in 1588. It's massive. Everything from the first edition, plus new essays, plus extensive additions to the old essays. The book is now a living thing, growing and changing with him. He's not trying to get it right and move on. He's trying to keep pace with his own evolving understanding of himself and the world. This edition includes what might be his most famous essay, Of Experience. It's long, digressive, utterly characteristic of the late Montaigne style. He talks about kidney stones again, in excruciating detail. He talks about his bowel movements. He talks about what he likes to eat and how he likes to sleep. And through all this apparent triviality, he makes profound arguments about the nature of human knowledge. Experience, he argues, is where wisdom lives. Not in abstract principles or logical systems, but in the messy, particular details of actual life. The philosophers want to transcend the body, to reach pure reason. Montaigne says that's nonsense. We are bodies. Our thinking happens in bodies. Our knowledge is always embodied, always limited, always shaped by our specific physical existence. So yes, he's going to write about his kidney stones. Because that's part of being human. The pain, the embarrassment, the way illness changes how you see the world. Philosophy that ignores this isn't profound. It's incomplete. He writes about aging. He's 55 now when the second edition appears. His body is failing in various ways. His memory isn't what it was. His energy flags. But he's not complaining exactly. He's observing. What's it like to get old? What changes? What stays the same? The philosophers have theories. Montaigne has the actual experience. He'll take experience over theory every time. The book makes him even more famous. It's discussed in salons, debated by scholars, read by people who've never read philosophy before. Some readers love it, some hate it, some think he's a dangerous skeptic undermining civilization. Some think he's the most honest writer they've ever encountered. Everyone agrees he's unlike anyone else. He starts thinking about a third edition. More editions, more expansions, more new essays. He never stops. The project of understanding himself, of capturing human experience in words, doesn't have an ending. You just keep going until you die. There's always more to say, more to discover, more contradictions to acknowledge. In 1590, he travels to Paris. It's a dangerous trip. The wars are still raging, but he wants to supervise the printing of the new edition. He meets with his publisher, works on the proofs, adds even more material. He's 60 now. His health is declining, but he's still writing, still expanding, still trying to get it right, or at least more right, or at least more honest. The third edition never appears in his lifetime. Not quite. He's still working on it when death interrupts, but the manuscript survives. His literary executor, Marie de Gournay, will publish it after he's gone. Everything he wrote, all the additions, all the final thoughts, the complete essays. But we're not there yet. In 1590, Montaigne returns from Paris to his tower. He has maybe 2 years left, though he doesn't know that. He keeps writing, keeps adding to the essays, keeps examining himself, keeps being honest about the confusion, the uncertainty, the impossibility of ever really knowing anything for sure. The wars continue around him. France tears itself apart, armies march, cities burn. People kill each other over theological fine points that Montaigne suspects no one really understands. And in his tower, he writes about how little we know. how uncertain everything is, how the wisest response to human limitation is not to pretend we're more than we are, but to accept our smallness with grace. It's not a popular message in an age of certainty, but it's the only message he has, the only one that seems true to his experience, the only one that respects the complexity of being human, the only one that makes room for mercy in a world drowning in righteousness. He writes late into the night sometimes. His hand cramps, his eyes tire, but he keeps going, because what else is there to do? The world outside is incomprehensible, violent, full of people who think they understand everything. In his tower, surrounded by his books, Montaigne can at least be honest about not understanding. He can at least try to capture what it's actually like to be alive, confused, mortal, and human. The candle burns down. He lights another one. The page fills with words. Tomorrow he'll write more. The tower is his world. The books on his shelves are his companions. The blank pages waiting for his words are his purpose. Montaigne writes because there's nothing else that makes sense. He's 60 years old. The kidney stones are worse. The pain comes in waves that leave him gasping. Sometimes he can't sleep. Sometimes he can barely walk. His body is betraying him one system at a time. He writes about that too, what it's like to feel yourself failing, to watch your own decline, to know that death is coming closer every day, and there's nothing you can do except notice it happening. He doesn't make it noble. He doesn't pretend it's a spiritual journey. It just hurts. That's the truth of it. Old age hurts. Dying hurts. Your body stops working, and it's undignified and embarrassing, and there's no wisdom in it, just deterioration. He writes that down. All of it. The things other writers wouldn't mention. The bodily functions that fail. The way pain makes you stupid. The indignity of needing help with basic tasks. If you're going to write about the human experience, you can't leave out the parts that aren't pretty. In 1591, he travels to Paris again. Another dangerous journey. But he needs to see his publisher, needs to work on the book. The third edition is almost ready. Just a few more additions, a few more corrections. He'll never stop correcting. Every time he reads something he wrote years ago, he sees ways to improve it. Better words, better examples, better honesty. The manuscript grows like a living thing. Layers upon layers. Essays written in 1572 now carry editions on 1580 and 1588 and 1591. Different versions of himself speaking to each other across decades, sometimes contradicting each other, sometimes agreeing, always changing. That's the point, to show that thinking is a process, not a conclusion. That wisdom, if it exists at all, is knowing you'll never arrive at final answers. Paris is still dangerous. The Catholic League controls parts of the city. Henry IV is besieging it. There are food shortages. People are starving. But Montaigne navigates it somehow. He meets with his publisher, reviews the proofs, makes more changes. He's obsessive about it now, getting the words exactly right, or as right as they can be, which is never quite right enough. He returns to his estate in early 1592, exhausted. The journey was too much. His health is clearly failing. He knows it. Everyone knows it. But he keeps writing. What else would he do? Sit around waiting to die? That seems worse. At least with writing he's doing something. Making something. Leaving something behind that might help someone understand what it was like to be him. To be human. To be confused and mortal and trying anyway. The kidney stones attack more frequently now. The pain is incredible. Medieval medicine has nothing useful to offer. They try things, bloodletting, herbs, prayer. Nothing works. The stones just keep forming, keep moving, keep tearing him apart from the inside. He writes about the pain, tries to describe it accurately. Not to complain, though he does complain, but to record it, to witness his own suffering, because someone should. Because if you can't make Emmy, Eaning from pain, you can at least make testimony. You can at least say this happened. This is what it felt like. I was here. Summer comes. Montaigne is in his tower, writing, always writing, adding more to the essays, correcting, expanding, never satisfied. The work is never done, can never be done, because he keeps changing. Every day, he's slightly different from the day before. How can you finish a self-portrait when the subject won't hold still? You can't. You just keep painting, keep adding brushstrokes, keep trying to capture something that's constantly moving. September 9th, 1592. He's in his tower, working on the essays. He feels strange, different. Something is wrong. He tries to keep writing, can't. The words won't come. His hand won't work properly. He calls for help. His wife comes, his servants. Something is very wrong. He's conscious, but he can't speak. The words are there in his mind, but he can't get them out. It's not the stones this time. It's something else, something worse. His body is shutting down in a new way. They put him to bed. He's awake, alert, but silent. The man who spent his life finding words to describe everything has lost the ability to speak. There's a terrible irony in that. Almost funny, if it wasn't so awful. For 3 days he lies there, unable to communicate, unable to write, unable to do the one thing that defined him. His wife stays with him, his daughter, his household. They watch him dying. He knows he's dying. You can see it in his eyes, but he can't tell them anything, can't leave final words, can't make a speech about he just lies there, silent, probably terrified, probably frustrated, probably still thinking, the mind working even as the body fails. On the third day, September 13th, 1592, he dies. He's 59 years old. Not old by modern standards, but old enough for the 16th century. He lived longer than many. He accomplished more than most. He left behind a book that would change how people think about thinking, but he didn't get to finish it. The third edition was almost ready. Almost? Just a few more corrections, a few more additions. He ran out of time. That's how it goes. You don't finish, you just stop. Marie de Gournay, his literary executor, publishes the complete essays in 1595. Everything Montaigne wrote, all the additions, all the layers, the whole accumulated projet. CT of 30 years of self-examination. It's massive, rambling, contradictory, repetitive, brilliant. Unlike anything else in literature, the book spreads across Europe. It's translated into other languages, Italian, English, Spanish. People read it and recognize themselves, or recognize a way of being honest they'd never seen before. Some readers are scandalized. The Catholic Church puts it on the index of forbidden books. Too skeptical, too willing to question, too honest about bodily functions, but people read it anyway. You can't ban a book that tells the truth, not permanently. The truth finds its way. Montaigne's influence grows slowly. He's not fashionable. He's not part of any school of thought. He doesn't have disciples promoting his system. He doesn't have a system. He just has his honesty, his willingness to admit uncertainty, his essays. But that's enough, more than enough. Writers read him and learn something, that you can write about yourself without pretending to be more than you are, that you can admit confusion, that you can change your mind, that you can be vulnerable and still be taken seriously. Shakespeare probably read him. You can see traces in Hamlet. That same questioning, that same uncertainty, that same awareness that we can't really know anything for sure. Flaubert read him, called him a brother. Emerson read him. Virginia Woolf read him. Every writer who tries to be honest about the difficulty of being human owes him something. His essays become a genre. Other people start writing essays. The word itself comes from his title, essay. Everyone who writes personal non-fiction is walking a path he cleared. Everyone who tries to think on the page, who lets the reader see the process instead of just the conclusion, is following his method. He invented a way of writing that hadn't existed before, by accident. Because he was bored, because he wanted to understand himself, because he couldn't stop asking questions. The tower still stands. You can visit it if you go to France. The chateau is there. The round tower where he worked, the library where he read, the ceiling beams where he had quotations carved, Latin maxims about the uncertainty of knowledge, about death, about the limits of human understanding. You can stand in the room where he wrote. It's smaller than you'd expect. Stone walls, narrow windows, a place, that's where he did it. That's where he created something that would last 400 years and counting. Just a man in a room, writing about what it's like to be alive. The essays never go out of print. Every generation discovers him again. Finds something new in the old words, or finds something old that feels new because we keep forgetting it, that we don't know as much as we think, that certainty is dangerous, that admitting confusion is honest, that being human is harder and stranger and more interesting than any theory can capture. Montaigne wouldn't be surprised his book is still read, but he wouldn't claim to understand why. He'd probably write an essay about it, about the mystery of why some books last and others disappear, about the strangeness of being dead for centuries, while your words keep living, about how little he knows about any of it. That was his gift, not having answers, asking better questions, not pretending to wisdom, admitting to confusion, not claiming certainty, acknowledging doubt. In an age of religious war, of absolute conviction, of people killing each other over ideas they were sure were true, Montaigne said, maybe we don't know. Maybe we should be less sure. Maybe the proper response to human limitation is humility. It didn't stop the wars. His skepticism didn't make anyone lay down their weapons. The world went on being violent and certain and terrible, but his book survived. His voice survived. His honesty survived. And 400 years later, we still need it, maybe more than ever. We live in another age of certainty. Everyone knows their right. Everyone has the truth. Everyone's cause is righteous. The arguments just change subjects. The structure stays the same. Montaigne would recognize it instantly. The same pattern, the same dangerous confidence, the same refusal to admit uncertainty. His essays offer something else, not answers, not a system, not a program for fixing everything. Just a different way of thinking. A way that makes room for doubt, for changing your mind, for admitting you were wrong, for being uncertain without being paralyzed, for acting even though you don't know for sure. That's harder than it sounds. Certainty is comfortable. Doubt is uncomfortable. Admitting you might be wrong is painful. Changing your mind feels like failure, but Montaigne shows it doesn't have to. You can be uncertain and still be thoughtful. You can doubt and still act. You can admit confusion and still try to be good. You just can't claim to have everything figured out. That's the deal. The tower stands. The essays remain. The voice still speaks across 4 centuries, still asking questions, still admitting uncertainty, still trying to be honest about what it's like to be human, which is confusing and mortal and often undignified and occasionally wonderful and always more complicated than any theory can hold. Montaigne died in 1592, but the conversation he started never ended. Every reader becomes part of it. Every person who picks up the essays and finds themselves in those pages, who recognizes the voice, who feels less alone in their confusion. That's what survives, not the man, not the tower, not even really the words, the conversation, the permission to be uncertain. The example of someone who tried to be honest about not knowing, who made that honesty into art, who showed that admitting confusion could be a form of wisdom, the greatest wisdom maybe, the only wisdom that lasts, because certainty ages poorly, but honest doubt never gets old. We need it in every generation. Someone to remind us that we don't know as much as we think, that our enemies might be partly right, that our certainties might be partly wrong, that the truth is more complicated than any side admits. Montaigne did that. still does that. Will keep doing that as long as people read him. As long as someone opens the essays and hears that voice, calm, skeptical, humorous, sad, honest, human, the voice of someone who doesn't know but keeps trying anyway, who admits confusion but doesn't give up, who faces uncertainty without pretending it's certainty. That voice matters, still matters, will always matter, because the alternative is what Montaigne saw around him. War, dogma, cruelty, people so sure they're right that they'll kill for it. He offered something else, not perfect, not even always consistent, but honest. That counts for something, maybe everything. The essays weren't supposed to be what they became. That's worth understanding. Montaigne didn't set out to revolutionize how people think. He just wanted something to do. After he retired from public life, after he locked himself in his tower, he faced a problem wealthy men have faced forever. What now? You can only walk around your estates so many times. You can only inspect your vineyards so often. You can only have so many conversations with your neighbours about the weather and the crops. Boredom is dangerous for thinking people. It makes them restless, makes them question things, makes them start projects they might not finish. Montaigne started writing, not because he had something important to say, because he had nothing else to do. The first essays were short, simple, almost trivial. He wrote about sadness, about liars, about how we shouldn't judge someone's happiness until they're dead. Basic stuff. The kind of thing any educated person might jot down in a notebook. But something happened as he wrote. The essays got longer, more personal, more strange. He started including things you weren't supposed to include. Details about his body, his digestion, his kidney stones, his preferences, his contradictions. This was shocking. Gentlemen didn't write about their bowels. Philosophers didn't admit confusion. Serious thinkers didn't change their minds on the page where everyone could see. Montaigne did all of it. He made the private public, made the shameful speakable, made uncertainty respectable. Why did this work? Why did readers respond to what should have been embarrassing? Because everyone recognized themselves. Everyone had a body that embarrassed them. Everyone had thoughts that contradicted each other. Everyone had been certain about something, then changed their mind. They just didn't talk about it, didn't write about it, pretended it wasn't happening. Montaigne talked about it, wrote about it, made it the whole point. The form he invented matched the content perfectly. Essays. From the French essai, meaning attempt, trial, test. Not conclusions, not proofs, not arguments that claim to settle anything. Just attempts. Just someone trying to think something through. That trying is visible on every page. You can watch Montaigne's mind working. Watch him start with one idea, veer into another, come back to the first, question both, end somewhere different from where he began. This drives some readers crazy. Where's the structure? Where's the argument? Where's the thesis statement and the supporting evidence and the logical conclusion? Nowhere. That's not how the essays work. They work like thought actually works. Associative, wandering, circular, contradictory, honest. Take the essay on friendship. It's supposedly about his relationship with Etienne de la Boétie, the friend who died young and left Montaigne devastated. But it's also about Roman history, and Greek philosophy, and marriage, and digestion, and back to friendship, and off to something else. Why? Because that's how grief works. It doesn't stay on topic, it connects to everything, reminds you of everything, makes everything else seem trivial and profound at the same time. The structure isn't chaotic, it's honest. This is what it actually feels like to think about loss. Montaigne shows you the process, not just the conclusion. Or consider On Cannibals. It's about the indigenous people of Brazil brought back to France by explorers. Europeans called them savages, barbarians, less than human. Montaigne looks at their customs and asks a dangerous question. Compared to what we do to each other, In religious wars, who's really barbaric? He describes European torture methods, the things done in the name of God and King, the cruelties that civilized people inflict on each other daily. Then he describes the Brazilians' practices, which seem tame by comparison. The essay doesn't conclude that the Brazilians are noble savages. Montaigne wasn't that simple. It concludes that barbarism is relative, that calling other people savages mostly reveals what you're trying not to see about yourself. This was radical, still is. The assumption that our way is the right way, the civilized way, the only way, runs deep. Montaigne questioned it, not with anger, not with moral superiority, just with observation. What if they're not wrong? What if we're not right? What if it's all more complicated than that? These questions made people uncomfortable then, make people uncomfortable now. Because once you start questioning which side is civilized, you have to question everything else. Your beliefs, your certainties, your whole framework for understanding the world. Montaigne knew this, did it anyway. Called the collection Essays to avoid claiming he'd figured anything out. Just attempts, just trials, just one person trying to think honestly about difficult things. The first edition appeared in 1580. 2 volumes, several hundred pages. Montaigne was 57. He'd been working on them for 8 years. He sent copies to important people, waited to see what would happen. People read them. Some were scandalized, some were confused, some recognized immediately that something new had entered the world. A voice unlike any other, a way of thinking that made room for uncertainty without collapsing into chaos. The book sold, not spectacularly, but it sold. People talked about it, argued about it, tried to figure out what exactly Montaigne was doing. He was doing something that seems simple but isn't. Being himself on the page, completely, without apology, without trying to seem better or wiser or more consistent than he actually was. This sounds easy. It's nearly impossible. Try it. Try writing about yourself with complete honesty, admitting every contradiction, every shameful thought, every time you changed your mind, every time you were wrong, every time you acted badly, every physical detail you'd rather hide. You can't do it. Nobody can. We edit ourselves constantly, make ourselves presentable, hide the parts that don't fit the story we're telling. Montaigne didn't, or at least he did it less than anyone else had, and that honesty created something powerful: permission. If he could admit confusion, you could too. If he could contradict himself, you could too. If he could be uncertain and still write, still think, still try to be good, you could too. The permission mattered more than any specific argument. Because what people needed then, what they need now, wasn't another system claiming to have everything figured out. It was an example of someone admitting they hadn't. But Montaigne wasn't satisfied with the first edition. He kept writing, kept adding, kept revising. The essays got longer. New ones appeared. Old ones expanded. The book grew like a living thing. The second edition, in 1588, was substantially larger. More essays, more digressions, more of everything. Montaigne was 75, still questioning, still uncertain, still trying to figure things out. He died in 1592. The third edition appeared posthumously in 1595, edited by his adopted daughter, Marie de Gournay. Even larger, even more sprawling. The final form of a book that never wanted to be final. Because that was the point. The essays weren't meant to be finished, they were meant to be ongoing. An endless process of questioning and reconsidering. A conversation that didn't end because the author died. The book found readers. Slowly at first, then more quickly. It was translated into other languages: Italian, Spanish, English. Each translation brought new readers who recognized the voice, who felt less alone in their confusion. Shakespeare probably read Montaigne. You can see it in the plays, that questioning of certainty, that awareness that people contradict themselves, that willingness to show characters thinking out loud, changing their minds, being uncertain. Hamlet is basically an essay in dramatic form. A man who can't decide, who questions everything, who sees all sides of every question, who thinks too much to act. That's Montaigne's influence. That's what happens when you take uncertainty seriously. The essays influenced Pascal, influenced Descartes, though he disagreed with almost everything Montaigne said, influenced Rousseau, influenced Nietzsche. Every philosopher who came after had to deal with what Montaigne had done. Some tried to refute him, build systems that would eliminate uncertainty, prove that we can know things for sure. Descartes spent his life trying to find certainty that Montaigne had questioned, found it in "I think, therefore I am," which Montaigne would have questioned too. Others embraced the uncertainty, made it the foundation of their own thinking. Pascal admitted that we're caught between certainty and doubt, forced to bet on things we can't prove. That's pure Montaigne. The literary influence was just as profound. Every personal essay written since owes something to Montaigne. Every memoir that tries to be honest about contradiction. Every piece of writing that shows thought in process rather than just conclusions. The form he invented became one of the dominant forms of modern thought. We call them essays now, without remembering where the word came from, without remembering that they were originally attempts, trials, tests, not finished products. But the real influence is harder to measure. It's in how we think about ourselves. The permission to be uncertain, the possibility of changing your mind, the acceptance that people contradict themselves. And that's not a flaw, it's just how people are. Before Montaigne, that wasn't respectable. You were supposed to have positions, defend them, never waver. Consistency was a virtue, certainty was strength. After Montaigne, there was room for something else, for admitting you don't know, for holding two contradictory ideas at once, for being uncertain without being weak. That room matters, still matters, because certainty is dangerous. Certainty starts wars, kills heretics, refuses to listen, claims to have God on its side. Uncertainty is safer. Uncertainty listens, considers, admits it might be wrong, leaves room for other people to be partly right. Montaigne showed how to do that, not by being wishy-washy, not by refusing to take positions, but by holding positions lightly, by being willing to reconsider, by admitting that the truth is more complicated than any single perspective can hold. The tower still stands in the Dordogne. Tourists visit. Look at the beams with their inscriptions. Try to imagine Montaigne working there, writing his endless attempts to understand himself and the world. The library is gone. The books are scattered. The man is dust, but the voice remains. In the essays, on every page, still questioning, still admitting confusion, still trying to be honest. That voice found its way to Virginia Woolf, to James Baldwin, to David Foster Wallace. Every writer who tried to be honest about uncertainty, who showed their thinking rather than just their conclusions, who admitted they might be wrong. It's in the scientific method, in the idea that you propose hypotheses, test them, revise them, that you never claim final truth, just better approximations. Montaigne didn't invent that, but his willingness to question everything, to admit uncertainty, to revise his thinking, helped make it possible. It's in democracy, in the idea that no one has all the answers, that we need multiple perspectives, that we have to talk to each other, listen, compromise. That certainty is dangerous in politics because it leads to tyranny. Montaigne didn't invent democracy, but his skepticism about anyone claiming to have the truth helped create space for it. It's in therapy, in the idea that you need to examine yourself, understand your contradictions, accept your complexity, that being honest about who you are is the first step to changing. Montaigne didn't invent therapy, but his project of self-examination, his willingness to look at himself honestly, his acceptance of contradiction, laid groundwork. The influence is everywhere, once you start looking. Every time someone admits they were wrong, every time someone changes their mind publicly, every time someone says, "I don't know," instead of pretending certainty. That's Montaigne's legacy, not a system, not a set of beliefs, not answers to the big questions, just permission. Permission to be uncertain, permission to be confused, permission to be human in all its contradiction and complexity. That permission matters more than any answer. Because answers change. What seems certain in one century seems absurd in the next, but the honesty doesn't change. The willingness to admit uncertainty doesn't change. The willingness to look at yourself clearly doesn't change. That's what survives. But Montaigne didn't just write about himself. He wrote about the world, about how people live, about customs and habits and the strange ways humans organize their societies. And what he noticed over and over was how arbitrary most of it was. Take cannibalism. Europeans in Montaigne's time were horrified by reports of cannibals in the New World. Savages, they said, barbarians, less than human. Montaigne wasn't so sure. He read the accounts carefully, talked to people who'd been there, and he started asking questions. These cannibals ate their enemies after battle, as a ritual, to absorb their courage. Europeans found this disgusting. But Europeans also burned people alive for having the wrong religious beliefs. They tortured prisoners. They massacred entire cities. So who exactly were the barbarians? Montaigne didn't defend cannibalism. He just pointed out the hypocrisy. We call things barbaric when they're different from our customs. But our customs aren't automatically better. They're just ours. We're used to them. That's all. This was radical, still is, because most people assume their way of life is natural. Correct, the way things should be. Other ways are wrong, inferior, need to be fixed or eliminated. Montaigne questioned that. Not to say all customs are equally good. Some are clearly better than others, but the assumption that our customs are automatically superior just because they're ours, that needed questioning. He applied this everywhere, to how people dress, how they eat, how they marry, how they bury their dead, how they organize their governments, how they worship their gods. Every custom that seemed natural to Europeans, Montaigne could point to somewhere else, where people did things completely differently, and they thought their way was natural too. This created a problem. If customs are arbitrary, if there's no one right way to live, then what's the basis for anything? How do you decide what's good or bad, right or wrong? Montaigne's answer was complicated. He thought some things were genuinely better than others. Cruelty was bad, kindness was good. But a lot of what people thought about, what they killed each other over, was just preference, just habit, not worth the bloodshed. This made him deeply skeptical of colonialism. Europeans were conquering the world, claiming they were bringing civilization to savages, teaching them the right way to live. Montaigne watched this and thought, maybe we're not as civilized as we think. Maybe what we call civilization is just our particular set of habits. Maybe we should be more humble, learn from others instead of assuming we have nothing to learn. Revolutionary idea, didn't catch on much in his time. Europeans kept conquering, kept assuming superiority, kept destroying cultures they didn't understand. But the seed was planted. The idea that cultural difference doesn't mean inferiority, that you can learn from people who live differently. That humility might be wiser than certainty about your own superiority. You see this now in anthropology, in the idea that you study cultures on their own terms. Try to understand them from inside. Don't just judge them by your standards. Montaigne didn't invent anthropology, but his willingness to question European superiority, to take other cultures seriously, helped make it possible. You see it in human rights, in the idea that people everywhere have dignity, that different cultures can have different customs, but the same fundamental worth. That diversity is valuable, not something to be eliminated. Montaigne didn't invent human rights, but his skepticism about cultural superiority, his recognition of common humanity across difference fed into it. The essays are full of this. Stories about distant lands, strange customs, different ways of being human. And always the question, are we really so different? Are our ways really so superior? Or are we just familiar with our own habits and suspicious of others? This connected to something else Montaigne cared about deeply: education. He'd been educated in the humanist tradition, Latin drilled into him from childhood, classical texts memorized, the full Renaissance program, and he thought most of it was wrong. Not the content, the method, the way it was taught. Schools, Montaigne said, train students to repeat what they've been told, to memorize authorities, to argue from precedent. But they don't teach students to think, to question, to examine ideas for themselves. The result was educated people who could quote Cicero but couldn't reason, who knew what Aristotle said but didn't know how to evaluate whether Aristotle was right, who had heads full of other people's thoughts but no thoughts of their own. Montaigne wanted education to produce independent minds, people who could think for themselves, who questioned what they were taught, who tested ideas against experience, who weren't afraid to disagree with authorities. This meant changing everything. Instead of memorizing, students should discuss. Instead of accepting, they should question. Instead of learning what to think, they should learn how to think. The teacher's job wasn't to fill students with knowledge, it was to draw out their capacity for judgment, to strengthen their ability to reason, to make them skeptical of easy answers. Radical then, still radical now, because most education is still about transmission. Here's what you need to know, memorize it, pass the test. We've added some critical thinking, some discussion, but the basic model is still filling students with approved knowledge. Montaigne wanted something else. He wanted students who could think, who could evaluate, who could question him as easily as anyone else. No sacred cows, no untouchable authorities, just ideas to be examined. This comes from his experience. He'd been force-fed Latin as a child. His father hired a tutor who spoke only Latin to him. The idea was total immersion. It worked. Montaigne knew Latin perfectly, but he resented the method, the forcing, the lack of choice. He wanted education to respect students, to treat them as rational beings developing judgment, not as empty vessels to be filled, not as raw material to be shaped, as minds to be strengthened through exercise. You see this in progressive education, in Dewey's idea that students learn by doing, in Montessori's respect for children's autonomy, in every approach that values student thinking over student compliance. Montaigne didn't invent progressive education, but his critique of rote learning, his emphasis on independent judgment, his respect for students as thinkers helped make space for it. The Tower Library was his classroom, teaching himself, following his curiosity, reading what interested him, questioning everything. No curriculum, no tests, no grades, just the pleasure of learning and the discipline of thinking clearly. That's the education he wanted for everyone. Impossible, maybe. Not everyone has a tower and a library and unlimited time, but the principle matters. Education should produce people who can think, not people who can repeat. That distinction is everything, because the world changes. What you memorize becomes obsolete, but how you think stays with you. The ability to examine ideas, to question assumptions, to think independently, that's what lasts. Montaigne knew this, lived it, made it the center of his project. And here's what's strange. He was writing all this in his tower, mostly alone, for no particular audience, just working through his thoughts on paper. He didn't expect to change the world, didn't have a program for reform, wasn't trying to start a movement. He was just trying to understand things, to think clearly, to be honest, and somehow that mattered more than any systematic program could have, because systems get rigid, programs become dogma, Movements calcify into institutions that resist the very change they once championed. But an honest voice examining itself and the world, that stays flexible, stays alive, keeps questioning, can't be turned into orthodoxy because it refuses orthodoxy by nature. That's why Montaigne still matters. Not because he had answers, because he kept asking questions. Not because he built a system, because he refused to build systems. Not because he was certain, because he admitted uncertainty. The essays aren't a philosophy, they're a demonstration. This is what it looks like to think honestly, to examine yourself, to question your assumptions, to admit confusion, to revise your thinking, to be human in all its complexity. And that demonstration turned out to be more influential than any philosophical system. Because you can't argue with it. You can disagree with Montaigne's conclusions, but you can't disagree with his honesty, his willingness to examine himself, his refusal to pretend certainty he didn't feel. That's unarguable and contagious. Once you see someone being that honest, you want to be that honest too. Once you see someone admitting uncertainty without shame, you feel permission to admit your own uncertainty. Once you see someone thinking in public, showing their work, revising their conclusions, you realize that's what thinking actually looks like. Not the polished argument, the messy process. Montaigne showed the process. That's what makes the essays great, not the conclusions, the thinking, not the answers, the questions, not the certainty, the doubt. 3 editions, hundreds of editions, constant revision. The essays grew because Montaigne kept thinking, kept questioning, kept changing his mind. He could have stopped, published the first edition and been done. But he couldn't stop. His mind kept working, kept noticing things, kept questioning what he'd said before, so he kept adding. The book became a record of a mind in motion. That's rare. Most books present finished thoughts, polished arguments, final conclusions. The essays present thinking itself. The actual process, including the dead ends and contradictions. That's why people keep reading them. Not for Montaigne's opinions about cannibals or education, or any particular topic. For the experience of watching a mind work, honestly, fearlessly, without pretense. That experience is timeless, because minds still work the same way. We still get confused, still contradict ourselves, still revise our thinking, still struggle to understand ourselves and the world. Montaigne shows that's okay. That's not failure. That's thinking. The tower is empty now, has been for centuries, but the voice remains. In the essays, on every page, still questioning, still revising, still refusing easy answers. That voice shaped modernity, not by building systems, by questioning them, not by providing certainty, by admitting doubt, not by claiming authority, by examining everything, including itself. The influence runs through everything, through how we write, how we think about identity, how we approach education, how we view other cultures, how we handle uncertainty, through the entire modern project of thinking for yourself. That project isn't finished, never will be, because there's always more to question, more to examine, more to revise. Montaigne knew that, lived it, left us the example. And the permission to be uncertain, permission to question, permission to change your mind, permission to be complicated, permission to be human. That permission matters, still matters, will always matter, because certainty is seductive, authority is comfortable, systems are reassuring, but reality is complicated, people are complex, truth is difficult, and the only honest response is to keep questioning, keep examining, keep thinking. That's Montaigne's legacy, not a doctrine, a method, not answers, an approach, not certainty. The courage to remain uncertain. And that courage, that honesty, That willingness to keep questioning changed everything. Still, changing it. We'll keep changing it as long as people read the essays and hear that voice. The voice that says, I don't know. I'm not sure. I might be wrong. Let me think about this more carefully. The voice that made uncertainty respectable. That made thinking visible. That showed being human in all its confusion and complexity. That voice echoes forward, through 4 centuries, into now, into whatever comes next. Because the questions don't stop. The thinking continues. The examination goes on, and the questions it raises. What is the self? Montaigne asked it, never answered it, kept circling back. Different angle each time, different answer. That's the point. There is no single answer. The self isn't a thing. It's a process, always changing, always becoming, never fixed. Montaigne understood that, lived it, wrote it, made it the foundation of everything he did. Before Montaigne, people thought the self was stable. You were who you were, your character determined, your nature fixed. Maybe you could improve yourself through virtue. Maybe grace could transform you. But the core remained constant. That was the assumption. Montaigne shattered it, not through argument, through observation. He watched himself, carefully, honestly, and noticed something strange. He wasn't the same person from day to day. Sometimes, hour to hour. His opinions shifted, his moods changed, his preferences altered. The man who wrote something yesterday might disagree with it today. The person who felt one way in the morning might feel completely different by evening. This troubled him at first, seemed like a flaw, inconsistency, weakness. But he kept observing, kept recording, and gradually realized it wasn't a bug, it was the feature. The self is inconsistent, that's what it is. A collection of contradictions, a bundle of moods and opinions and reactions that shift constantly. Trying to pin it down is like trying to grab water. The harder you squeeze, the more it escapes. He wrote about this everywhere, in different ways, different examples, the same insight from 1,000 angles. I cannot keep my subject still, he wrote. It goes along befuddled and staggering, with a natural drunkenness. That's the self. Befuddled, staggering, drunk on its own contradictions. And that's fine. That's normal. That's human. This was revolutionary. Not just as philosophy, as lived experience. Because if the self is always changing, then you can't define people, can't fix them in place, can't say this is who they are and will always be. Everyone is more complicated than that, more fluid, more interesting. Modern psychology caught up 4 centuries later. Now we talk about the self as constructed, performed, situated, multiple, all the academic language saying what Montaigne showed through simple observation. You're different with your parents than your friends, different at work than at home, different when you're tired than when you're energized, different versions, all real, all you. The self is plural. That changes everything. How you judge people, how you judge yourself. If someone contradicts themselves, that's not hypocrisy, that's humanity. If you change your mind, that's not weakness, that's thought. If you feel differently about something today than yesterday, you're not confused, you're alive. Montaigne gave permission for that, made it respectable, normal, even admirable. Because if the self is always changing, then rigidity is the problem. Flexibility is strength. The person who never changes their mind isn't wise. They're stuck. The person who admits uncertainty isn't weak. They're honest. He applied this to everything. Education, politics, religion, friendship. Take friendship. The culture said friendship should be based on utility. You help me, I help you. Or virtue. We encourage each other toward goodness. Montaigne said no. Real friendship transcends reason. His friendship with Etienne de la Boétie, which lasted only 4 years before la Boétie died, became his model. If you press me to tell why I loved him, Montaigne wrote, I can say no more than because he was he and I was I. That's it. No justification, no reasons, just recognition, two selves meeting, understanding each other completely, needing nothing more. When La Boétie died in 1563, Montaigne was devastated. The loss shaped everything after. At the Tower, the essays, the entire project, he was trying to continue the conversation, with a friend who was gone, with himself, with readers he would never meet. That understanding of friendship influenced everyone who came after, the Romantics especially. The idea that connection transcends reason, that some relationships just are. You can't explain them. Don't need to. They exist in their own right. Wordsworth and Coleridge, Byron and Shelley. The entire romantic ideal of friendship traces back to Montaigne and La Boétie. Same with education. Montaigne hated his schooling. The rote memorization, the endless Latin drills, the beating of information into students like hammering nails. He thought it was backward. Education shouldn't fill the student. It should cultivate them, like gardening. You don't make plants grow. You provide conditions, remove obstacles, let nature work. He wanted education to teach judgment, not facts. We are great fools, he wrote. He has spent his life in idleness, we say. I have done nothing today. What, have you not lived? That is not only the fundamental, but the most illustrious of your occupations. Living, thinking, experiencing, that's what matters, not accumulating information, developing yourself. This influenced Rousseau directly. His Emile, the revolutionary treatise on education, is basically Montaigne updated. Don't force children into moulds. Let them develop naturally. Teach them to think, not what to think. Give them experiences, not lectures. The entire progressive education movement traces back through Rousseau to Montaigne and politics. Montaigne lived through the wars of religion, Catholics versus Protestants, massacres, atrocities, neighbours murdering neighbours over doctrine. He found it insane, not the caring about religion, the certainty. Each side absolutely convinced they were right, willing to kill for it, die for it, destroy everything for abstract principles they couldn't even agree on. He took a different approach, skeptical, pragmatic, yes, have beliefs, but hold them lightly. Remember, you might be wrong. The other side might have a point, or both sides might be wrong, or the question might not have an answer. In any case, don't kill people over it. That's barbarism dressed as piety. This got him in trouble. Both sides suspected him. Catholics thought he was too sympathetic to Protestants. Protestants thought he was too Catholic. He didn't care. Or rather, he cared about ending the violence more than defending doctrine. He worked for peace, negotiated, compromised, made himself useful to both sides precisely because he belonged fully to neither. His political essays influenced Montesquieu, Voltaire, the entire Enlightenment project of religious tolerance. You don't have to agree with someone to let them live. Don't have to approve of their beliefs to grant them rights. This seems obvious now. Wasn't then. Montaigne helped make it obvious by questioning certainty, by admitting doubt, by showing that you could be religious without being fanatical, thoughtful without being heretical. The method mattered as much as the conclusions. How do you approach questions? With what attitude? Montaigne's attitude was curiosity, not judgment, not certainty, curiosity. Let's examine this, look at it from different angles, consider counter-arguments, admit what we don't know, stay open, keep thinking. That attitude shaped science, not directly. Montaigne wasn't a scientist, but the scientific method requires exactly that stance. Curiosity over certainty, questions over answers, willingness to be wrong, to revise, to keep testing. Francis Bacon, who helped establish the scientific method, read Montaigne, absorbed the attitude, applied it to nature instead of human nature. The modern world is built on that attitude, On questioning, on empiricism, on admitting uncertainty, on revising conclusions when evidence changes? That's not natural. The natural human tendency is certainty, conviction, defending what you already believe. Montaigne showed another way, demonstrated it, made it appealing, made it work. He also influenced literature. Obviously, the personal essay is his invention. But more than that, the idea that ordinary experience matters, that inner life is interesting, that you can write about yourself without being important. Before Montaigne, you wrote autobiography if you were a saint or a king, if your life had public significance. Montaigne wrote about himself because he was human. That was enough. This opened literature to everyone. If Montaigne's experience mattered, so did yours. If his thoughts were worth recording, so were yours. If his contradictions were interesting, so were yours. The novel as we know it, focused on ordinary people's inner lives, descends from that permission. Richardson, Fielding, Austen, all of them writing about regular people, as if they mattered. Because Montaigne showed they did. Virginia Woolf saw this, called the Essays the first modern book. Because Montaigne was the first modern consciousness, the first writer to make his own uncertainty the subject, to examine himself not as representative of anything, not as moral example, just as himself, complex, contradictory, interesting precisely because he was so ordinary and so strange. The essayists who followed knew their debt. Bacon acknowledged it. Emerson absorbed it. Virginia Woolf, George Orwell, James Baldwin. The entire tradition of personal non-fiction traces back to the tower in Bordeaux, to the man writing about kidney stones, and the smell of his library, and whether his cat was playing with him, or he with his cat. That last question, by the way, opens another dimension. Montaigne's relationship with animals, completely unusual for his time. The culture said animals were different in kind from humans. No reason, no soul, just biological machines. Descartes would later argue this explicitly. Animals are automata. Their cries of pain are like the creaking of machinery. Meaningless. Montaigne rejected this completely. He watched his cat, played with her, and wondered, when I play with my cat, who knows if I am not a pastime to her more than she is to me? The question undermines everything. Who's the subject? Who's the object? How do you know? You can't get inside the cat's mind. Can't know what she's thinking. Maybe she's just as curious about you. Maybe more intelligent. You don't know. This opens on to the problem of other minds. How do you know anyone else has consciousness? You experience your own thoughts directly. Everyone else is inference. Maybe they're philosophical zombies, behaving as if conscious but actually empty. You can't prove otherwise. Montaigne was raising this problem centuries before philosophy made it formal, and extending it to animals. If you can't prove humans have minds, you certainly can't prove animals don't. Your assumption of superiority might be pure prejudice, convenient for eating them, questionable as philosophy. This influenced later thinkers, Darwin especially. If humans and animals are continuous, not separate kinds, then where do you draw the line? Consciousness? Language? Tool use? Every line you draw, some animal crosses it. Maybe the difference is degree, not kind. Animal rights philosophy traces back here. Peter Singer's arguments, Tom Regan's, the entire project of taking animal suffering seriously. Montaigne didn't develop a full theory, just asked questions, noticed things, challenged assumptions, but the questions were enough. They stuck. They spread. They changed how people think. Same with his essays on cannibals, on the New World, on cultural difference. The culture said European civilization was superior. Obviously, Christianity, classical learning, technology, proof of advancement. Everyone else was barbaric, needed converting, civilizing, conquering for their own good. Montaigne questioned this, met people from Brazil, listened to them, learned about their customs, and noticed something. They seemed shocked by European practices, by inequality, by poverty existing alongside wealth, by cruelty. Maybe, Montaigne suggested, they had a point. Maybe European civilization wasn't obviously superior. Maybe different cultures had different values, different ways of organizing life, different answers to human questions. Maybe barbarism was in the eye of the beholder. This was radical, cultural relativism before the term existed. The idea that you can't judge other cultures by your own standards, that your own culture's practices might seem barbaric to outsiders, that there's no neutral standpoint, no view from nowhere, just different perspectives, each shaped by its own assumptions. Anthropology, as a discipline, absorbed this, the principle that you study cultures on their own terms. Don't impose your values, try to understand how the people themselves make sense of their lives. That's Montaigne's method, applied systematically. Claude Lévi-Strauss acknowledged the debt. Montaigne was the first anthropologist, the first European to look at other cultures with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. The implications run deep. If cultures are different but equally valid, then your own culture's values aren't universal. They're particular, local, contingent. This threatens everything. Religion, morality, political systems, all of it becomes questionable, relative, open to examination. That examination is modernity. That's what the modern world is, the project of questioning everything, including the questioning itself. Montaigne started it, didn't finish it, couldn't finish it. The questions multiply, the examination continues. New angles, new problems, new uncertainties. That's the point. There's no final answer, just better questions, deeper examination, more honest uncertainty. Montaigne showed us how, gave us the method, the attitude, the courage to not know. And that courage, that honest uncertainty, that willingness to keep examining, created the world we inhabit. A world where everything is questionable, where certainty is suspect, where thinking never stops. That examination touches everything, politics especially. Montaigne lived through religious civil war, Catholics versus Protestants, France tearing itself apart, each side certain, each side righteous, each side willing to kill for truth. Montaigne watched and drew conclusions. Fanaticism comes from certainty. You don't massacre people over questions, you massacre them over answers. The more certain you are, the more dangerous you become. Doubt is the brake on violence. Uncertainty makes you hesitate. Question yourself. Consider alternatives. Maybe you're wrong, maybe they have a point, maybe killing them isn't necessary. This was heresy. Both sides hated it. To Catholics, Protestant heresy threatened salvation. To Protestants, Catholic corruption betrayed Scripture. Both believed compromise was surrender. Neutrality was cowardice. You had to choose, take a side, fight. Montaigne refused. Not because he lacked conviction, he was Catholic, remained Catholic, but he wouldn't kill Protestants, wouldn't support massacres, wouldn't treat certainty as justification for violence. His position was sophisticated, more sophisticated than either side understood. He believed in tolerance, not because all views are equally true, but because humans are equally fallible. You might be wrong, your opponents might be right, or both of you might be partly right, partly wrong. The situation is complicated, your understanding is limited, certainty is premature, so tolerance becomes necessary, not as weakness, as wisdom. This influenced political philosophy profoundly. John Locke read Montaigne. His arguments for religious tolerance echo these themes. You can't force belief. Persecution doesn't produce genuine faith. Different people interpret Scripture differently. No one has final authority, so let them worship as they choose. The state should stay neutral. That's the foundation of liberal democracy. Separation of church and state, freedom of conscience, religious tolerance, All of it traces back to arguments Montaigne made while France burned. The practical application was immediate. Montaigne served as mayor of Bordeaux during the wars. Difficult position, dangerous position. The city was Catholic, but Protestant forces surrounded it. Royalist armies fought nearby. Everyone armed, everyone suspicious. One wrong move meant disaster. Montaigne navigated it, kept the city relatively peaceful, refused to take extreme positions, negotiated with both sides, protected refugees, prevented massacres that happened elsewhere. His method was simple. Listen to everyone. Trust no one completely. Make decisions case by case. Don't commit to rigid principles that force your hand. Stay flexible. Stay human. He wrote about this, about the difficulty of governing during chaos, about the temptation of ideology, about how abstract principles can justify concrete atrocities. A ruler who follows theory rigidly will make terrible decisions. Reality is messier than theory. People are more complicated than categories. Good governance requires judgment, not rules. Judgment. This is pragmatism, American pragmatism especially. William James, John Dewey. The idea that philosophy should be practical, that theories should be judged by their consequences, that abstract principles matter less than concrete results. Montaigne was the first pragmatist, testing ideas against experience, valuing what works over what sounds good. His political writings influenced Montesquieu. The separation of powers, checks and balances, the idea that no one should have absolute authority. Why? Because humans are fallible. Give anyone too much power and they'll abuse it. Not because they're evil, because they're human. Limited, biased, certain beyond their competence. So divide power, make different groups check each other, force negotiation, compromise, moderation. This prevents tyranny, not perfectly. Nothing works perfectly, but it works better than alternatives. That's the pragmatic test. Does it reduce harm? Then keep it. The American founders absorbed this, Madison especially. Federalist 10. The whole constitutional structure. It's Montaignean. Distrust of certainty, awareness of human fallibility, preference for messy compromise over clean theory. The Constitution is an essay, testing ideas, revising them, staying uncertain. But Montaigne's influence runs deeper than specific political ideas. He changed how people think about authority itself. Before Montaigne, authority was simple. God, Scripture, Aristotle, ancient wisdom. You cited authorities, quoted them. Your argument's strength depended on whose authority you invoked. The bigger the name, the stronger the claim. Montaigne questioned this, not the authorities themselves necessarily. The whole concept of authority. Why should ancient writers be right? They were human, like us. They made mistakes, had biases, limited knowledge. We've learned things since then. Why defer automatically? This is the modern attitude. Question everything, including the questioners. No one gets automatic deference. Not Aristotle, not the church, not tradition, not experts. Everyone has to justify their claims. Provide reasons, evidence, arguments that stand up to examination. That's the Enlightenment in a nutshell. Sapere aude, dare to know. Think for yourself. Don't accept claims on authority. Examine them, test them, decide for yourself. Kant made it explicit, but Montaigne lived it first. The consequences were revolutionary. Science couldn't develop until authority was questioned. You can't do experiments if you already know the answers. You can't discover new things if ancient books contain all truth. The scientific revolution required Montaigne's attitude. Doubt authorities, trust observation, test hypotheses, revise theories when evidence contradicts them. Francis Bacon acknowledged this. The scientific method is systematic Montaignean skepticism. Question received wisdom. Observe carefully. Experiment. Draw conclusions tentatively. Stay ready to revise. That's the essay method applied to nature. Same openness, same humility, same willingness to be wrong. And this attitude spread everywhere. History became critical. Scholars questioned ancient sources, checked claims, looked for bias, propaganda, error. They stopped treating old texts as sacred, started treating them as evidence, flawed evidence from flawed observers, useful but unreliable. Economics developed, questioning traditional assumptions about wealth, trade, value. What if everything we think about money is wrong? Let's examine it, test it, see what actually happens when we change policies. That's Montaignian economics, Smith, Ricardo, Mill, all of them questioning inherited wisdom. Even religion changed, theology became critical. Scholars examined scripture historically, asked who wrote these texts, when, why, under what circumstances, what biases did they have, what were they trying to accomplish. This was shocking, treating the Bible like any other ancient text, but it was inevitable once Montaigne's attitude spread. Nothing is above examination. That examination reached everything eventually. Gender, race, class, all the categories societies use to organize themselves, all the hierarchies people accept as natural. Montaigne's method questions them. Why are things this way? Who benefits? What assumptions underlie current arrangements? Are they justified? Feminism is Montaignian. Simone de Beauvoir writing The Second Sex, asking why women are subordinate, examining the assumptions, finding them arbitrary, conventional, not natural, not necessary, just traditional. And tradition isn't justification. That's pure Montaigne. Same with civil rights movements. Racial hierarchies seemed natural for centuries. Then people started examining them, asking questions, checking assumptions, finding nothing underneath, no justification, no reason, just power and prejudice. The examination destroyed the hierarchy. Slowly, painfully, but inevitably. This is why Montaigne matters. Not because he answered questions, he didn't. He asked them, and taught others to ask. That questioning is still happening, still spreading, still undermining certainties, creating the world we inhabit. But there's a problem. Montaigne saw it. The questions never stop. You question authority, then question the questioning, then question the questioning of the questioning. Where does it end? Does it end? Can it? If everything is questionable, then nothing is certain. If nothing is certain, how do you make decisions? Act? Live? The skeptical method works great for undermining bad ideas, less great for building good ones. You can tear down false certainties easily. Building true ones is harder, maybe impossible. Montaigne struggled with this. His essays circle the problem repeatedly. How do you live without certainty? How do you make choices when every option is questionable? His answer was unsatisfying. You muddle through, act provisionally, do your best with limited knowledge. Accept that you might be wrong. Keep examining, keep adjusting. That's not heroic, not inspiring, but it's honest, and it's what humans actually do. We act despite uncertainty, make decisions with incomplete information, live in ambiguity. The alternative is paralysis or false certainty. Both are worse. This connects to his views on death, the central human question, the thing everyone fears, the uncertainty that matters most. Montaigne wrote about death constantly, obsessively, trying to understand it, prepare for it, make peace with it. His conclusions evolved. Early essays are stoic. Death is natural. Accept it. Don't fear it. Later essays are less certain. Maybe you can't prepare. Maybe acceptance is impossible. Maybe death remains terrifying no matter what philosophy says. The honesty is striking. He's admitting failure. Philosophy can't solve this problem, can't remove the fear, can't make death okay. All it can do is help you think about it. Face it. Acknowledge it. That's not nothing. but it's not victory either. Heidegger read these essays. Being and Time is full of Montaigne, the idea that death defines human existence, that awareness of mortality shapes everything, that authentic living requires facing death honestly, not denying it, not romanticizing it, just acknowledging it, living with it, letting it inform your choices. Existentialism generally absorbed Montaigne's attitude toward death, Camus especially, the myth of Sisyphus, the absurd, the meaninglessness, the necessity of living anyway. That's Montaignean. You can't solve the problem, can't make it go away, can only face it honestly, keep living despite it, find meaning in the facing itself. But Montaigne's deepest influence might be stylistic, the essay as form, as method, as way of thinking. Before Montaigne, philosophical writing was systematic, started with principles, deduced conclusions, built arguments carefully, tried for completeness, certainty, final answers. Montaigne rejected this. His essays wander, digress, circle back, contradict themselves, change direction midstream. They're messy, like thinking actually is, like life actually is. The form matches the content. Uncertainty requires uncertain prose. Questions require questioning structure. This liberated writing. Suddenly you didn't need a system, didn't need answers, could explore ideas openly, follow where they led, admit confusion, change your mind. The essay became the form for honest thinking, provisional, exploratory, human. Every essayist since owes him. Emerson, Thoreau, Woolf, Orwell, Baldwin, Didion, they're all writing Montaignean essays, personal, questioning, uncertain, using themselves as evidence, their experience as data, their confusion as method. That's the lineage. That's the inheritance. And it's not just professional writers. Blogging is Montaignean. Social media too. Everyone writing personal reflections, sharing observations, questioning things, being uncertain in public. It's crude often, unreflective, but the impulse is the same. Ordinary people thinking aloud, testing ideas, revising them. That's what Montaigne made possible. He democratized philosophy, made it accessible. You don't need training, don't need credentials, don't need systematic method. Just think honestly, observe carefully. Write down what you notice. That's philosophy. That's the essay. Anyone can do it. This matters more than specific arguments, more than particular conclusions. Montaigne's real contribution was showing that philosophy belongs to everyone, that thinking is human activity, not specialist domain. You have a mind, use it, examine things, question things, write things down. You're a philosopher now. That's the legacy, not a system, not answers, an invitation to think, to question, to examine, to write, to be uncertain honestly rather than certain dishonestly, to keep looking, keep wondering, keep trying to understand. Montaigne died in 1592, 59 years old, writing until the end, adding to his essays, revising them, never finishing them. He knew they were incomplete, knew they always would be. That was the point. The examination continues, has to continue, can't stop. 4 centuries later, we're still reading him, still finding him relevant, still recognizing ourselves. The questions haven't changed, the uncertainty hasn't resolved. We're still examining, still questioning, still trying to understand what it means to be human. And that's Montaigne's achievement, not answering the question, showing us how to live with it. We've followed Montaigne through his life, through his library, through his mind. But there's something we need to address directly. Something that runs through the essays like an underground river. Something uncomfortable, something most readers prefer to ignore. Montaigne was wealthy, comfortably wealthy, inherited wealth. He didn't earn it, didn't build it, was born into it. The tower where he wrote, the library he filled, the leisure to examine himself for 20 years. All possible because others worked. Peasants farmed his land. Servants maintained his house. An entire economic structure supported his philosophical withdrawal. This matters, not to dismiss him, not to invalidate the essays, but to understand them fully, to see what they reveal and what they hide. The essays are often read as universal, timeless, true for all humans everywhere, and in many ways they are. The questions are universal. The uncertainty is universal. The experience of being alive and mortal and confused, that's everyone's experience, but the ability to examine that experience, to write about it, to spend years reflecting on it, that's not universal. That's privilege, specific historical privilege, the privilege of a 16th century French nobleman who didn't need to work. Montaigne barely mentions this. He talks about his kidney stones, his sexual anxieties, his reading habits, his fear of death, but the economic foundation of his life, the labour that sustained it, the people who made his leisure possible, they're mostly absent. When peasants appear in the essays, they're examples, illustrations, evidence of folk wisdom. Montaigne admires their simple acceptance, their lack of philosophical anxiety. He romanticizes them slightly. The noble savage before Rousseau, people uncorrupted by education. But he doesn't examine the relationship, doesn't ask what it means that his freedom depends on their unfreedom, that his leisure requires their labour, that his ability to question everything rests on an economic base he never questions. This isn't unique to Montaigne. It's the story of philosophy generally. Plato was wealthy. Aristotle was supported by wealthy patrons. The Stoics were often slaves or emperors, but wealthy or enslaved. Both had time to think, because others did the work. Modern philosophy pretends otherwise. Pretends thought is pure, disembodied, happens in some abstract realm separate from material conditions. But it doesn't. Thinking requires time, energy, resources, not worrying about survival. That's not available to everyone. Montaigne knew this implicitly, had to know it, but never examined it directly. Never turned his questioning eye on his own position. The tower was his retreat, not his prison. He could leave whenever he wanted, return to public life, manage his estates. He chose contemplation. That's different from having no choice. Should this invalidate what he wrote? No. The essays remain valuable, the insights genuine, the method revolutionary. But we should read them aware of their limitations, their blind spots, what they can't see because of where Montaigne stood. Other voices were missing from his world. Women barely appear except as objects of desire or examples of virtue. The Americas existed. Montaigne knew about them, wrote about them occasionally, but the encounter with genuinely different civilizations, that didn't shake his worldview as it should have. Religious minorities existed, Protestants and Catholics killing each other. Montaigne witnessed this, deplored it, but his tolerance was aristocratic tolerance, above the fray. Not the tolerance of someone whose life depended on it. This doesn't make Montaigne a villain, doesn't make the essays worthless, just makes them what they are. One voice, one perspective. Valuable but partial. Universal in aspiration. Limited in execution. The real question is what we do with this. How we read him now, 4 centuries later. Different world, different assumptions, different blind spots of our own. We could reject him entirely, say his privilege invalidates everything, that we can't learn from someone so embedded in unjust structures. That would be consistent, also wasteful, throwing away genuine insight because it's imperfect. Or we could read him critically, take what's valuable, recognize what's limited, use his method while questioning his assumptions, learn from his honesty while noting what he wasn't honest about. That seems more useful, more Montaignean actually. He'd probably approve. The essays teach questioning, examining, remaining uncertain. We should apply that to the essays themselves. Question them, examine them, remain uncertain about what they're really saying. That's the method he gave us. Use it on him. What remains after this examination? What survives the critique? The core insight still holds. Self-knowledge is difficult, requires constant effort, never finishes. You can't step outside yourself, can only observe from inside. That's the human condition. That's true regardless of Montaigne's privilege. The method still works. Writing as thinking. Essays as exploration. Honesty about uncertainty. These tools remain valuable. They've been democratized since Montaigne, spread beyond aristocratic libraries. More people can use them now. That's progress. The questions still matter. What is good? How should we live? What can we know? What does mortality mean? These haven't been answered, won't be answered, but asking them honestly, that's still the work, and the spirit still inspires, the willingness to look, to question, to examine everything including yourself, to remain uncertain, to keep trying. That attitude transcends Montaigne's limitations, becomes available to anyone, so we read him critically but gratefully, aware of what he couldn't see, grateful for what he could, taking what helps, leaving what doesn't, using his tools to examine his own blind spots. That's how ideas progress, each generation reading the previous one, taking something, adding something, passing it forward. The tower still stands. In Bordeaux, you can visit it, walk through the library, see where Montaigne wrote. Tourists come, take pictures, buy postcards. It's become a monument, a shrine to thinking. But monuments are dangerous. They freeze what was living, turn questions into answers, make what was uncertain seem certain. Montaigne would hate being a monument, hate having his words carved in stone, fixed, final, beyond revision. Better to think of the tower as empty now, the book's gone, the writer gone. Just a space where something happened once, where someone tried to think honestly. Mostly succeeded, sometimes failed, kept trying anyway. That space isn't unique, doesn't require a tower, doesn't require wealth, doesn't require 16th century France. Any space can become that. Your room, your desk, your morning walk, wherever you stop and think, wherever you question what you thought you knew. That's Montaigne's tower now. The library has been democratized. Not just metaphorically, literally. Public libraries everywhere. Internet access, more books available to more people than ever existed in Montaigne's world. The tools of examination have spread. That's one victory. The leisure hasn't been democratized. Not really. Most people still work too much. Worry about money. Can't withdraw to towers. The economic constraints that Montaigne ignored still operate, still determine who gets to think, who gets to write, who gets heard. But something has shifted. Marginalized voices are speaking now, writing essays, questioning things. People Montaigne couldn't imagine having time or tools to write. Women, workers, people from colonized societies, people in poverty. They're examining, questioning, using his method, expanding it, correcting it. That's the real inheritance, not the specific arguments, not the particular conclusions. The permission to think, to question, to examine, to write down what you notice. Montaigne gave that permission to future aristocrats. They passed it to the middle class. The middle class passed it wider. Now it's spreading further, slower than it should, but spreading. Every personal essay is Montaignian, every honest blog post, every social media thread examining something carefully, every attempt to think in public, to question assumptions, to remain uncertain honestly. That's all Montaigne. The genre he invented, the method he demonstrated, crude often, unreflective sometimes, but alive, growing, evolving, and the central insight endures. You are strange to yourself. You contain contradictions. You don't fully understand your own mind. You can't achieve certainty, can't escape subjectivity, can only examine it carefully, honestly, endlessly. That examination is the work, not arriving at answers, not building systems, not achieving wisdom, just looking, questioning, noticing, writing it down, revising it, looking again. That's philosophy. That's living examined. That's what Montaigne showed us. 400 years later, we're still examining, still questioning, still uncertain. The essays weren't the last word. Were never meant to be. Were explicitly offered as unfinished, as provisional, as one man's attempt, flawed attempt, honest attempt, valuable attempt. We read them now, not for answers, not for certainty, not for systematic philosophy. We read them for permission, for method, for company, to know we're not alone in confusion, not alone in uncertainty, not alone in the difficulty of self-knowledge. Montaigne examined himself. We examine ourselves. That's the tradition. That's the lineage. Not agreement, not discipleship. Just the shared work, the human work, the work of trying to understand what it means to be alive, to be mortal, to be confused, to keep going anyway. The essays end mid-revision. Montaigne died before finishing them, before arriving at conclusions. That's fitting, perfect actually. The examination can't finish, because life doesn't finish until it does, and then you're not there to write about it. So the work continues, has to continue, each generation taking it up, examining, questioning, being uncertain, writing it down, passing it forward. That's what Montaigne started. That's what we inherit. Not wisdom, not answers, a method, an attitude, an invitation to look at yourself, honestly, to question everything, including your questions, to remain uncertain, to write it down anyway, to revise constantly, to never finish, to examine until you can't examine anymore. That's what philosophy is. That's what living examined means. That's what Montaigne gave us. Not solved, not answered, not completed, just begun, opened, made possible, for himself first, then for us, then for whoever comes next. The tower is empty now. The writer gone. The essays remain, unfinished, uncertain, questioning, examining, still, always, forever.